I'd like to thank you all for joining Marilyn Smith's faculty webinar, Cracking the Creativity Code, Why Do Creative Ideas Not See the Light of Day? Facilitated by Smith's very own Dr. Vijaya Venkataramani. I'm Allison Schwarz, Executive Director of Alumni Relations at the Smith School. I'm working in partnership with Smith's Office of Executive Education to produce these faculty webinars. We're also happy to partner with the Alumni Association's inaugural Career Week, a week-long virtual series to help alumni conquer, steer, and advance your career. I'd especially like to welcome our Smith and UMD alumni today, current students who have joined us from across the world. We appreciate your time and hope you find this a valuable source of learning. Please be aware that we are recording this session in full, so we can post a digital recording to the Marilyn Smith website, and we will send it to all attendees as well. I want to ask you to please keep your microphones muted to reduce background noise, and you're welcome to keep your cameras on. Vijaya will be presenting her material for approximately 25 minutes, and then we will move into a Q&A period. You can post your questions in the chat to everybody or directly to me, and I will address them after her presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Venkataramani. She is the Associate Professor of Management and Organization at the Robert H. Smith School of Business and is currently serving as an Associate Editor for the Journal of Applied Psychology. Professor Venkataramani's research focuses on creativity and innovation in organizations, especially understanding how informal social relationships and social networks at work enable employees' ability to develop and implement creative ideas. Her recent research has focused on exploring why, although employees may have new ideas, these ideas often go unheard, unrecognized, or even prematurely rejected by their managers, and how both employees and managers can address this. Her research has appeared in such journals as the Academy of Management Journal, Organization Science, Journal of Applied Psychology, Personnel Psychology and Organizational Behavior, and Human Decision Processes. I will now turn it over to Dr. Venkataramani.
Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you all of you for taking the time to be here. I'm really happy to be presenting my work. So my plan for today, like Allison said, is to very broadly provide an overview of the kind of research that I'm doing. And hopefully at the end of it, have some sort of a discussion with you guys in terms of your feedback or your thoughts on what I present. As well as take away some insights for my own research as I think about what to do next in my work, and hopefully and potentially collaborate with some of you who might resonate with some of the things that I'm talking about. So as Allison mentioned, my research generally deals with creativity and innovation. So now innovation actually involves both creativity, which is the generation of new and novel ideas that are also useful, as well as ideas that, I'm sorry, there is some problem here with this. I'm going to.
Are your slides not advancing?
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm going to start this again. Sorry for this.
No problem.
It's the same problem again. All right. Okay, so this is creating problems. I'm probably just going to make this bigger and just talk without going into slideshow mode, if that's okay. So as Allison said, my research deals with both creativity and innovation, or the implementation of creative ideas. Now, why creativity? If you look at the 20 most popular TED Talks videos of all time, the top one is about creativity. And a lot of recent surveys have talked about how CEOs, as well as employees and managers, say that creativity is the most important or most desired skill that they want in their employees. Yet, there's also a lot of evidence that is mounting that says that, well, ideas are dime a dozen. There are lots of ideas. Employees come up with lots of ideas. Many of them might not see the light of day, right? And this is unfortunate. One, because while there are ideas, they don't help the organization become more innovative if they're not implemented. And two, if these ideas get rejected, then it also is a demotivating factor for a lot of employees to even come up with some of these ideas the next time. So my research today that I'm going to talk about is more about the second part of not related to how can you make employees more creative, but more about why is it that these ideas, when they are brought up, don't actually get implemented. So, so who are the main players? If you look at uh, any idea, there are different components, so different reasons why these ideas might not be seeing the light of day. And there are certain factors that are affected by the idea itself. The idea might be, not practical. The idea is not well thought out. There might be factors related to the employee, the person that generates the idea. They've not, they don't have the credibility, or they don't have the competence to get it done, or they haven't pitched it the right way. They haven't sold their idea the right way. A third factor or a third player in affecting this entire process of innovation is a manager or the decision maker who makes decisions about whether I should approve an idea to go ahead, whether I should give the resources for further development of this idea. So the manager is another important factor, and all of these are encompassed in a broader organizational context or culture, if you will. Certain organizations are more bureaucratic, certain organizations have more politics, certain organizations don't have the resources, or some of them don't value innovation as much. So there could be a myriad of reasons why innovation is not happening in organizations, right? But today, in today's talk, I'm going to focus more on one aspect, which is that of the manager. Right? And I do a lot of research on the other aspects as well, but today my focus is going to be more on what is it about specific managers, or what role do these specific managers play in determining whether ideas go ahead or not, right? And this is also an important factor because managers play a very important gatekeeping function where they're the first people that receive the ideas, they evaluate the ideas and make decisions about what to do about them, right? So there's some very interesting research recently that has found that organizations' performance is more determined by these middle managers much more than the actual innovators, right? So it's not just people that create the idea, the innovators that affect how successful an organization is, the kind of innovations they come up with, but it's actually variations in the behaviors, in the attitudes of managers, middle managers to be more specific, that actually has a greater role in affecting the performance of organizations more broadly. So that's kind of the reason why I look at I want to talk more about managers today. And Dilbert never fails to surprise you. There's always something that Dilbert has to offer for any idea that you're working on. Uh, so what is it about managers that affects this entire process? So before I actually go and share some of the findings that I have, I just have a very quick poll for you. Allison, if you can start with the first poll. I just want you guys to think about, based on your experience, what is the most important reason do you think ideas might get rejected by decision makers? Should we stop the poll, Allison? All right, so looking at the results, 42% of you think that it is because ideas are not practical, right? And 26% says they're too novel or that the idea generator is not credible. And there's only 8% people that say that the idea is not novel enough, right? This is very interesting because what I want to talk about is exactly the reasons, right? So what we find in our research is that managers tend, even though all these other reasons might be valid, we find that managers and decision makers more broadly tend to reject ideas because they're more novel, right? They're too novel, or they don't want novelty. And the reason why we find that this is the case is that managers, or especially when you're in a decision making role, when you become a manager or when you're in that managerial role, people become very averse to the uncertainty that novel ideas bring, right? All of us want a lot of structure, a lot of certainty. But when it comes to novel ideas, they're very different from what we have. They're very different from the familiar ideas that we have. So a lot of times managers look at the uncertainty that these novel ideas have, and they automatically think that these ideas are not going to be useful, right? And the interesting part of this research is Jennifer Mueller, who's a colleague who's at the University of San Diego, she actually did some very interesting research that said that even though people claim that they like creativity, so she did some surveys with managers, and she found that everybody pretty much said, yes, we value creativity, we value innovation. Now, then what they did was they made all these managers and respondents take what is called an implicit association test. It's a subconscious test. It's a way of understanding what kind of implicit or unconscious biases people might have uh, that they don't realize themselves, right? So what they did was they showed them a bunch of really creative products. For example, a shoe with a running shoe with nanotechnology, or diaper roofing. So they had a really bunch of really cool ideas. And these pictures would pop up on the screen, and they would ask them to associate that picture with certain words that also popped up. Some of these words were positive or negative, and they were all timed. It's about initially what your gut reaction is. And interestingly, what they found was even though all managers say they like creativity, they have an unconscious bias against creativity because they found that a lot of these creative ideas were associated with negative words like, rotten or really bad or ignore. So they found this very fascinating thing that people reject novel ideas because they have an unconscious bias towards these creative ideas because they're uncertain. And it's also a related thing to this is also that being in a managerial role, we put people in a manager's role versus an innovator's role and said, okay, how would you evaluate these ideas? And, pretty uniformly, people that were in managerial roles said, we're going to reject this idea. And the reason for that was that they were always in an economic mindset. They were trying to find problems. They were trying to find rational ways of, how much is this going to cost, or how much is this going to bring in? What is the ROI of this idea? But the problem with really creative ideas is that, they're almost like it's like they're ugly babies. When babies are born, and I don't want to use that in any disparaging way, but when they're born, they're not the nice, rosy babies that we think of. Like, and Ed Catmull talks about this in his book about Pixar as well, that when you have these really novel ideas first shared with a manager, they're not well developed. They require a lot of experimentation. They require a lot of development. They require a lot of resources. And these ideas, it's very difficult to predict or forecast how successful they're going to be, right? So it's really not a good idea to think about the economics of these really novel ideas because those are not going to be reliable indicators. However, the fact that you're in a managerial role where you're accountable makes people take on this economic mindset. That's another reason that we find that managers reject these ideas. The third one that is again something that all of us have heard about, this not invented here syndrome. So we said, okay, let's go and test this. So in a study with some of my students and I, we what we did was we market tested some really nice, cool, very creative ideas, but they were all that were very practical and were useful. And we gave it to a bunch of respondents. For half of them, we said this really creative idea was something that was developed outside. We heard about this from another employee who's joined the organization. For the other group, we said this was developed in-house, right? And the idea was exactly the same. And we also provided a contrast, really low novel idea. And interestingly, what we found was that managers were more likely to reject ideas, the exact same ideas, just because of the fact that they were not invented within the organization. There might be valid reasons, but we try to control for all those other reasons, but still this not invented here syndrome was really strong, which is again unfortunate because innovation thrives from getting inspired by people outside, from diverse sources of information, from diverse contexts. So just because of the fact that we get ideas from somewhere else, we tend to reject them, could be unfortunate. And more interestingly, we found that this was more so for managers who had strong levels of identification with their organization. You would think that if I really like my organization and I want it to succeed and I'm invested in its success, I would want to have ideas irrespective of where they come from. But we actually found that this was more a problem for those managers who actually were more identified with their organization than other people, right? So again, so these are just some research findings that we've documented about the biases that managers might have in terms of why they reject ideas. What are some of the reasons that they reject ideas? And more, and all these things happen more so in case of more novel ideas. Interestingly, when managers were first given a bunch of 30, 40 ideas and said, okay, please rate the creativity of these ideas. They all did that. We gave the same ideas to a bunch of consumers, potential consumers, and they also rated the creativity of the idea. Now, when the managers were asked, again, this is research that another group of people are also doing. When they were asked about which ideas would you implement, interestingly, the managers picked the least creative ideas as the ones that they would implement, whereas the consumers picked the most creative ideas as things that they would actually want to see in the market. So there is some kind of a disconnect between why the way managers think about this and the way other people think about this. So before I go further, again, I have another very quick poll about, and Allison, if you could go to the next one. What kind of managers, in your experience, do you think reject ideas more? All right. Okay. So 45% of you think that it is managers who are risk averse that reject ideas more. 33% of you think it's managers who feel insecure. So yes, there are many of these factors that play a role. But some important findings that we have from our own research is that controlling for risk aversion, yes, managers who are risk averse might reject really novel ideas, but it is actually managers who feel more insecure about themselves, about their own roles, that actually do feel more inclined to reject ideas, right? So we find, for example, that managers who have low self-efficacy or confidence, or managers that have lower status in the organization, tend to feel very threatened and very defensive when an employee comes up with a new idea for a new product. It could be a product, a service, or even a process improvement, right? So for example, when in a research study that I'm doing with one of my colleagues, Relly Rosen, I think, who's also here, we found in 4 different tech organizations that managers who had lower status, which means not just their competence, based on a lot of other factors, the amount of respect, the prestige that they had among other managers in the organization, people that had lower perceived status tended to act really territorial or acting to protect their own domain and therefore not endorsing the ideas that their employees came up with. So in studying this, we actually told actual employees in their organizations to come up with ideas. Think of ideas that you want to implement in your organization. We took all those ideas, took away their names. So the ideas were completely anonymous. And then we took these ideas to each of these managers. Now, these managers' status we had already measured beforehand from a survey that was administered earlier. And we told these managers, okay, look at these ideas. We're not going to tell you who came up with this idea because we didn't want to bias them about maybe the specific person that came up with the idea. How would you react to them? And we asked them about their feelings of, how strongly do you feel that you need to protect your own domain? And interestingly, very strongly, we found that people that had lower status within the organization had this urge to feel territorial, and therefore they refused to endorse or provide resources to any of these ideas. And interestingly, it was only for ideas that were considered to be highly novel. Now, we had another bunch of subject matter experts that rate all these ideas for how creative they were, how novel, how practical. So, controlling for how practical or useful they were, all these managers who had lower status tended to act territorial and refuse to endorse these ideas. Similarly, other people have found results which say that some managers who have a performance oriented goal mindset, which means these managers are more oriented to demonstrate their competence, they are more motivated to demonstrate how competent they are to others, versus people that are more learning oriented, or these are managers who are motivated more by learning or exploring or learning new things. Is people who are more performance oriented tended to perceive any new or novel idea to be a threat to their egos or a threat to their image as a very competent leader. So therefore, these people tended to reject ideas. And again, I'm talking more about ideas that are novel. These things don't matter if the idea is very incremental. Everybody's okay with implementing ideas to just make a slight tweak to an existing idea, to a familiar idea. It's problems with really novel ideas that all these issues come up with. So one key insight for us when we were doing this research was it's not just about rejecting novel ideas because they're novel, but also because of the way in which these novel ideas make certain managers feel about themselves. It's about how threatened they feel, how territorial they feel, what do they think will be the implications of an idea success for themselves. Right? So that was another sort of set of findings about what types of managers, why do they reject ideas, and what types of managers tend to reject these ideas more. And then finally, I have another poll for you. This is the last poll, I promise. Wait. What do you feel helps managers appreciate and value creative ideas most? Right, this is great. So I completely agree. Having domain expertise is actually a liability, and research also shows this in appreciating and valuing novel ideas, because when you have expertise or you're entrenched in a specific domain, you're not able to see something new. If you see something new, you're not able to appreciate the value of it. Being presented comprehensive facts and research might be important, but when we talk to a lot of people who hear pitches from their employees, they actually say that you're here on the table because you have the competence, you have the facts. But what we're looking for is to actually try and understand whether you can have a conversation with us, whether we can see how passionate you are about the problem that you're trying to address. And as most of you correctly surmised, being a co-creator is actually what helps managers appreciate these creative ideas more, and it also helps in reducing some of the threats that they experience. And this is also in academic terminology, we talk about this as the faith and supervision effect, or it's also called the IKEA effect, where they say if you actually build a furniture, IKEA furniture with your own hands, you think it looks much better than if you have somebody else fit it for you, right? So it's so being a co-creator, when you involve your manager in developing an idea from the beginning, that's when they actually appreciate and value these creative ideas more. Being and controlling for things like open-mindedness, or presenting facts and figures and stuff. I know we are so I want to take the last few minutes to talk about, so then what do we do? What does our research tell us in terms of what can we do in these situations? So I want to talk about it from two perspectives. One is from the employee's perspective, and the other is from the decision maker's perspective. As employees, some of my own research with Kay Bartol, who's a colleague here at the University of Maryland, talks about how when you enact ideas, when you provide a pictorial or a physical representation of an idea, a figure associated with an idea, then it helps people to see the value, especially of novel ideas. If you physically enact or show a pictorial representation of a really novel idea, we actually find that it backfires. But when you enact ideas, you have to have them along with influence strategies, rational persuasion, collaboration, different ways of influence strategies in combination with enacting an idea is what helps. Another thing that some of my students and I find, and my co-authors, is to combine familiar elements with novel ideas. So, for example, in some research that we're doing right now, what we did is we took a bunch of ideas, hundreds of ideas from Kickstarter, and we looked and we coded those ideas. We had independent coders look at different aspects of novelty. How functionally novel is this product, or how familiar does it look, right? And then we looked at how much money they've made, or how much of their pledge that they've received. And interestingly, we found that if you have a really functionally novel product, it actually is not very helpful unless the design of that was more familiar. So, in other words, instead of having novelty in all aspects, are there ways in which you can combine a really novel idea with some familiar element? So it reduces the uncertainty that decision makers face. And we actually do find, and we did it in an experiment also, we designed some really cool products, some of which we gave them really new designs, and some of them had really new functionality, but they had familiar looks, right? And we found that people tended to appreciate or recognize the creativity of these ideas more when combining familiar elements with these novel ideas. We can talk more about these as we talk. The other is in terms of framing. How do you pitch as an employee? How do you pitch the idea? Uh, One important thing that we found is to frame your pitches in terms of empathizing with your audience's goals, right? So what is important to them as compared to what is this idea going to do per se? Right? How is it that my idea or implementing this idea helps with the audience? What are their goals? What is my manager most interested in right now? Can I frame my idea in a way that satisfies or empathizes with those audiences' goals? Other ways to provide more social proof. Again, this is a way of reducing uncertainty that managers, especially those in managerial roles, face. It might the idea behind this is, when ideas are especially novel, go with social proof. Do some kind of an experiment or test and say, I found so many Facebook likes for this, or so many different people like this idea, or they appreciate this idea. So social proof was another way that we found would be factors that would help employees in pitching the idea. Finally, what do we do as decision makers? If you are in the role where you're receiving an idea, and we know about all these biases, some unconscious biases that people have, some research, and this is not my own, which finds that if you force yourself to be in a problem solving mindset as compared to a problem finding mindset, this actually helps in reducing all the biases that people have. So typically when managers are evaluating an idea, the general finding is that they're looking for problems, right? So what are the reasons this will not work? This is not practical. This is not, this is going to involve ABC. So the main reason for rejecting ideas is because they're in that rational economic thing and they're finding problems with it. So the only thing that the participants were told was think about it as a problem solving mindset. How can you resolve this problem? Right? And what these researchers found was that when you're in a problem solving sort of mindset, then you're trying to look at not the problems with it, but how can we resolve this? How can we make this idea better? How can we add other components to this and make this idea better? Another thing that other researchers have found in this is taking an innovator's perspective. So in one research study, they said, think of the most influential innovator that you can think of, or think of the most creative person that you know as an innovator. Think about what they do and what they think like. And then when they were given the idea to evaluate, people that were even in these managerial roles were able to see and appreciate the value of creative ideas better. Another finding that we are finding in our own research is having what is called a diverse change circle. So as Alison mentioned, I do a lot of research on social networks and how informal social relationships around you can influence how creative you are. So what we actually find, and we did this in an organization, a ceramics company, where we find that we asked employees to come up with a bunch of ideas. We did a survey of the social network of all the managers in that organization. Now, again, we took the ideas, stripped them of any identifying information, and gave it to these managers. And we found that the more the novel the idea, the lower they thought that the perceived value was, which is again in line with what we've talked about. But interestingly, what we found was that, but those managers that had a very diverse group of advisors, a diverse group of collaborators, a diverse group of people that they talk to in general to talk about work-related problems, to talk about ideas that they have, it was those managers that were able to actually appreciate the value of these creative ideas more, right? So having a more diverse set of people that managers talk to seems to be reducing the bias or the uncertainty or the premature rejection of novelty for conscious or unconscious reasons for why this might be happening. I'm going to stop here so we can talk more about this. Just in case anybody's interested, there are some books that are really interesting to read, and I especially like this book called Loon Shots, which really talks about how do you nurture these ideas, especially the crazy ones, and all of these books have really interesting insights to offer. So, okay, let me stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions or any points of view that any of you might have.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I will kick it off with our first question here. I am curious as to how the ongoing pandemic has or might affect some of these innovation dynamics.
Well, that's a very interesting question. We read a lot in the media about how people have become more creative as a result of being in the pandemic. How they've started baking more, writing more, becoming more creative. We also read a lot about how, people have found unique ways to deal with PPE shortages and stuff. So it's interesting. So some of my colleagues and I actually decided to look at this question. So we wanted to see if, is this a stable phenomenon? Is everybody feeling creative as a result of the pandemic? And so what we did was in a survey, we asked, this was in July or August of 2020, which we're right in the middle of this entire lockdown. And we asked them to come up with creative ideas for certain products. But we also asked them, which state do you live in? So we went back to the government website to look at the number of days that people had been under a lockdown. And we tried to see if there is a relationship, and we controlled for a bunch of other stuff. And we found that actually people that have been, the more the number of days, there was variation in the states in which how many days they've been under lockdown. The more the number of days that people were in lockdown, it adversely affected their creativity. It increased their uncertainty. It decreased their focus and their amount of concentration and engagement, cognitive engagement in any task. But interestingly, we found that this was more so for people that were more extroverted. Uh, People that were more extroverted actually had a significant dip in their creativity. We also found that actually people that had more family support and coworker support actually did not get affected so much by this in terms of their creativity. But another interesting finding was that people that spent a lot of time reading the news, the amount of hours they spend reading news on their media, actually significantly affected negatively their creativity. Right? So just to say that yes, COVID, and understandably so, has significantly adversely affected creativity of employees. But if we take that insight into how managers appreciate creativity, this, we haven't studied this yet, but my speculation would be that it would be even worse, because it's in times of uncertainty that people actually need these novel ideas, but it's in times of uncertainty that people want to go with more certain ideas. So managers tend to pick the more practical and the incremental ideas as compared to the more radical ones. So I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yes, thank you. How do you know which ideas to reject? What if there are some really bad ideas?
That is true. I mean, there are bad ideas. So when we talk about creativity, we talk about two factors. One being how novel or original, not familiar an idea is, and two, how useful it is, right? How you solve a problem. So you can reject ideas. There are certain characteristics that might make a bad idea. It's neither original nor practical. But sometimes the idea might be really novel, right? But it might just be a solution looking for a problem, which we don't really want, right? So in an organizational setting, we're looking for ideas that solve a specific customer's problem, that is practical, that is feasible, or that it doesn't fit with the organization's broader purpose at that particular time. We don't really think this fits in with the direction that we are going right now. Or maybe that it cannibalizes an existing idea that's really doing well in the market right now, right? So I feel like there are different reasons why you might reject and why they might be bad ideas. And the most important that I've seen is many times they are ideas that are just solutions. They're cool ideas, but they don't solve any problem. They're looking for a problem to solve, which might not be really helpful.
Okay. I think this might be in reference to the first poll. It was early in the presentation. The question is, does this change in a matrix reporting setting? For example, do project managers have the same level of influence as middle managers?
Yes, actually, any manager that is directly related or directly evaluating an idea will have a role to play. Yes, project managers might be evaluating ideas from different kinds of domains. But I think what the research says is that whatever the structure that you might be in, there is a general, on average, effect that people tend to reject ideas because they are in that role, because they're accountable. And again, there's other research that has shown that they've made people be in an innovator role and made them evaluate ideas, and then flip them to be a manager role, and something happens. And just because you're in that manager role, people start rejecting ideas. And that could be, because, they are accountable, they're responsible for the decisions that they make. In fact, the book, the Loon Shots book that I was talking about really talks about this, that all these crazy ideas, they don't get rejected in small companies. It's only when the companies become bigger, the structure becomes more complicated, that people start thinking about their careers, their promotions, their raises, and that's when all these other problems start coming in. So to answer your question, I feel yes, if you are evaluating any idea, on average there might be some differences in the specific structure that you might be in, but that's what the research sort of suggests.
Okay. Are there any solutions to getting novel ideas away from managers who feel threatened? How do innovators work with or around critical managers?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's something that I'm struggling to find out in my own research as well. So, one, as we were talking about co creation, right? I think one reason why managers feel threatened is because they feel that it's going to take something away from them, or it's going to show them in a poor light. So, one way is to actually co create with them, and sort of be open to sharing credit for that idea as you develop the idea. And the important thing is to not, show them an idea after you've worked on it for 6 months, but to show them an idea which is at an earlier stage, get their involvement in it, get them to help you develop the idea so that they are more invested in it. That we feel is, one way in which people who feel threatened might be. The other one, and this is something that, it's a recent research paper that came out, which said that, ideas that are discussed more in public versus private also have a role to play. So, for example, if you come up with an idea in public in front of the manager, that's when managers actually feel more threatened, is what this research finds. But if you talk to them in private about it, get some kind of feedback from them about it in your development, they are significantly okay with with these ideas. So that might be one option. The other, and this is dependent on organizations, I feel the other option that some organizations have been successful in doing is to completely separate the idea developers from the people that are in charge of efficiency, right? So have innovators separated completely from day-to-day, people responsible for day-to-day efficiencies of work, and but respect them equally. So these people that are in the innovation cell, you know, they've found that, for example, if you put together, and DARPA actually is a very good example of this, where they have teams, but there are no promotions, there are no career opportunities. They're just put together in teams, and the team disbands after a project is completed. So that's another way that some organizations, and that's not a feasible option in some places, but that might be another option. But I mean, I would love to hear from you if there are others, and that's something that I'm more interested in digging deeper in my own research as well.
We have a lot of excellent questions around this topic. So, you describe being creative in a traditional company. Many companies are creating spaces to fail within companies like Apple, Google, etc. Do these work better than doing what you instruct intrapreneurs to do than the creative space?
I don't think they are mutually exclusive because, the thing about innovation is that people, when I talk to organizations, they say, oh, but, we don't have the time, or we don't have the resources. But innovation, in a way, is not a hobby. It's something that you have to invest in: money, resources, time, effort. So to that extent, places like Apple, uh, it's actually good because you have the psychological safety to experiment and fail. And you learn as much from the ideas that failed as from the ideas that became successful. So I feel, yes, and and other places like Netflix, for example, they do similar stuff as well. They've completely separated their innovators, and they say that they have, I think, what is called a disagree and commit. They say, we want you to disagree with any idea that uh, other people come up with. We're going to have a discussion about it, but once we decide on an idea, we're all going to commit to it. So these safe spaces are extremely important for creativity. And I think several organizations have been successful in varying degrees in terms of how successful they are in creating these safe spaces. So I think, yes, the safe space or the sense of psychological safety, you don't need to create a creative space. Even within a small group headed by a manager, if the manager is able to create a sense of safety where people feel that they were not going to be sanctioned by challenging somebody else's ideas or coming up with something new which challenges the status quo, then I feel it would still be effective, even if you don't have dedicated creative spaces like some of these companies might have.
Do you have any strategies to come up with creative ideas in an ever-changing field such as technology?
Coming up, well, I think one from my own research is what I can say is the more diverse the people that you speak to, the more diverse the domains that of people or stuff that you read, that you interact with, we find that these diverse networks really help in sparking or triggering ideas that span domains. And creativity is nothing but the recombination of ideas that come from diverse domains, ideas that have not been known in our own domain, but something else that somebody else has done. And we repurpose it and we add it to something else that we know and add to it. Right. So from my own research, I can say that we find very strong evidence of diverse ties, even if they're weak ties to people in a completely different department, a completely different industry. These conversations help spark creative ideas because they help you understand or learn about things that you then suddenly click in your head, and then we put them together. So that's actually a very important aspect, I feel, of creating ideas that I can speak to from my own research. But other than that, there are other things. There's obviously brainstorming kind of activities that help, being non-judgmental when people are sharing their ideas. So there are different ways in which people's ideas trigger thoughts in our own minds. But more consciously, I think exposure to diverse knowledge bases is one of the most important, at least that's what research shows, in terms of triggering these creative thoughts. I hope that sort of answers your question.
What about managers who block ideas due to their political biases, which don't reflect the views of the organization?
Yes, unfortunately, that is a fact. So one way, and that's a question that we are trying to say, it's a very political process sometimes, that if you propose a really novel idea, it's going to be blocked by your own manager or by others who are potentially going to be affected by it. So, one thing that, we've seen that works is to actually, before you go and sell an idea, make a list of all the people you think will be affected by this idea. Go talk to these people beforehand, create some kind of common consensus or agreement about the value of the idea. Take their feedback beforehand. Try to address them before you actually go and pitch it. Again, this whole thing of this faith and supervision. If I'm involved in the idea, then I feel more uh, invested in seeing it through. But that said, there might be people, for example, like in our research, we find some managers just are territorial. They do not want to give up, even though it might benefit them. It's a very irrational sort of decision. But sometimes they might not do it. And that's when you probably have to, do some more, networking and creating this coalition around with other people and go together as a group to sell an idea instead of you just going alone. Show evidence of social consensus, show evidence of proof that an idea is well accepted by other people. So again, there's other research that shows that when you show proof, people actually feel that, okay, this is a situation that I cannot justify not endorsing an idea. So there are other ways in which people can get around it. But unfortunately, there are some cases that you might not be able to do anything if it's purely politics that is driving idea implementation.
Is there any research related to women and innovation in particular?
Oh, that's very interesting. So interestingly, the research about women and innovation shows that there is no real significant difference in the creative ability of men and women. But where the problem, I think, comes is how people perceive creativity coming from men versus women. So there's some research by people at Duke that talk about how creativity tends to be associated with very masculine traits like independence, like agency. So when implicitly people associate creative traits with creativity with masculine traits, what they find is that they tend to devalue ideas provided by women because they feel that creativity has to be something like this. Creativity has to be dominant. Creativity has to be out of the box. It has to be a certain way. It has to be radical, and all those things suggest agency or masculine traits. So, unfortunately, what the research is showing is that the same idea, if you say that this idea has been given by a man versus a woman, the woman's idea tends to be rated or undervalued in terms of creativity. They don't think that the same idea is creative. Unfortunately, it's a bias, and the problem is even women think that. If you Even women tend to think that the idea needs to be masculine, or creativity is a masculine trait, and therefore they tend to undervalue their own ideas as well. uh, and that's kind of what you know the research as of now seems to be showing. But then I think others are trying. I don't do much research on gender, but I think other researchers are trying to figure out. So maybe if you frame creativity in a different way, highlight how creativity is a collaborative process, it's a communal process, that actually helps. If you frame it like that, for people to see the value of women's ideas as well. uh, I don't know if that kind of answer. That's kind of what we know about gender and innovation as of now.
Okay. And I'm sorry we can't get to all the questions. We're going to do one last question just to be mindful of everyone's time. Do you have any insight on the responsibility of managers to encourage dissenting opinions and innovative ideas to minimize groupthink?
So yes, groupthink is a big concern, that people sort of jump onto the bandwagon when somebody says something dominant or strongly. Other people kind of pile onto it, and that can reduce any kind of dissent. So again, in terms of what the research says, when managers actively solicit ideas, and individually from specific people, and encourage this more in private as well as in public, this helps in reducing the problems of groupthink. And there are some interventions that have, for example, found that when managers say that I'm not going to make a decision until I hear from, or unless I hear from everyone. Again, it's also a question of the culture that you've created in the group. If people do not feel safe in voicing dissenting opinions, if they feel that they're going to be sanctioned, if they have a different opinion, then even if you say that I want ideas from everybody, they're not going to share diverse opinions. So they're all sort of interrelated. It's about the message that managers are providing. Have they created that safe climate for people to feel comfortable voicing without any fear of repercussion, without any fear of sanction? So I think that is a very strong finding in the literature, that if you want people to speak up with differing opinions and not be subject to groupthink, you have to create a culture which is safe for people to do so.
Excellent. And with that, I want to personally thank you, Vijaya, for your support of University of Maryland's Career Week and for leading us in this important discussion around creativity. Thank you also to our alumni, students, faculty, and staff for joining us today. The webinar has been recorded. It will include the slides, and we will email it to everybody once it's available so you can review it and share with your colleagues and friends. Please keep checking back with us for more webinars, short courses, and other learning opportunities from Maryland Smith Alumni Relations and Executive Education. Thank you again for joining us. There's a couple more events going on for Career Week, so I encourage you to check those out. Have a wonderful day, stay healthy, and go Terps.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the great questions. Feel